When I think about the FPS genre, I think that this is one of these genres that is in the most existential risk when it comes to any video game genre out there. And when I mean existential risk, I don't necessarily mean that there's never going to be another FPS game that's made, or that the games are not going to make any money. I don't mean that. But what I do mean is that the FPS genre is an existential risk into changing into something that is irrecoverable. It's never going to be the same, and the experience, in my opinion, will be mostly negative. So what do I mean by this? Well, I think there's things that are occurring within the video game industry that put a lot of pressure on the FPS genre in of itself. And the first thing is the competitive integrity of the game. Because in these video games, if you have no competitive integrity, if there's no integrity to the game of itself, why are you playing it to begin with? Is there an illusion going on that breaks the immersion of the experience? And I think that you have seen this just kind of mass increase in cheating in many FPS games, especially the more competitive ones. And I think that there's been a general failure in anti-cheating measures that video game studios have kind of put in their games. And I get it. There's this constant arms race of trying to fight the cheaters, and the cheaters try to find a new way to combat that. And that's always going to be some sort of dynamic. But I do think that developers in a lot of ways haven't really put a ton of effort into this experience that they should. And the thing is too, you see this kind of mass usage of cheating a lot more so than you did in the past. I mean, of course, there was always cheating way back in the day, but I think that there's more incentives for people to cheat now, especially if you can cheat to become a very popular streamer. There's just more ease of access to cheating in general. And so I think that that is something that puts the FPS genre in existential risk, especially from the perspective of esports in terms of these progression systems, in terms of just having fun with the game, because you don't know if you were beaten fair and square in a matchup. You don't know if the game is even real. I mean, you see this kind of increase in possibly the use of AI or bots to manipulate you in this experience. And so the question arises, why would you want to invest your time and energy into something where you don't even know if it's a fair game? You don't even know if there's cheating on the other end, or there's just bots on the other end. And that kind of brings me into that second idea, which is this level of manipulation that occurs within the FPS genre. And you kind of see this with this idea of skill-based matchmaking, or algorithms that could possibly be implemented that are influencing your behavior. Now, the thing about it is that this code is not open source, so you don't know what is underlying the matchmaking in the video game. You don't know what's happening under the hood. And there could be a lot of things that are there to try to keep you engaged. They might try to make you very emotional, very stressed out, negative, or really engaged with the game to try to get you to buy microtransactions. Or it's just trying to keep you engaged to play the game longer so that someone else that's more likely to buy a microtransaction will buy that. And I think there's this level of manipulation is becoming stronger and stronger, where a lot of people are getting fed up with it, and it makes people not want to play the video game anymore. And this kind of dynamic also kind of makes you question whether or not your progression as a player even means anything. Because if you're always kind of guaranteed to have a 50% win rate or something close to that, because it pairs you with people that you're going to beat or you're going to lose to try to keep you more engaged, you know, where is the progression there? Where is the fun in that? And I think that some of these skill-based matchmaking ideas are not necessarily all that bad, but there's this level of manipulation going on. There's this level of questions that I think put the FPS genre in risk. And the thing about it too is that all you really need is a lot of people to just kind of decide it's not worth to play this game anymore. It's not worth trying to grind the progression system. And this makes the game less popular. The FPS games make less revenue, and the experience is no longer what it was, this fun, immersive experience. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that the games won't be made anymore, but that experience that you loved, that experience that had you so immersed, just might not ever return. And this is why I'm saying that the FPS genre, in a sense, is an existential risk. The other thing too is that there's this level of excess greed, particularly within the FPS genre, where you see competitive advantages being kind of integrated into these games, whether it's pay-to-win mechanics or weapons, or even if it's just kind of a soft pay-to-win, where once again, it erodes the integrity of the game. And this makes things very not fun in a lot of ways, because in a lot of ways, when you had just video games without this kind of pay-to-win dynamic, the video game was kind of more of a reflection of who was the best, who had the best teamwork, who had the most skill. But now if you integrate pay-to-win mechanics, it becomes more of a reflection of real life with money as the proxy. And this kind of defeats that immersion within the video game. It destroys this sense of progress, both kind of individually and within the game in of itself. And I think this greed also just makes the game less fun in general. It's less about giving value to the customer and more about trying to extract as much revenue from them as possible over time. And I think that this kind of also feeds into this other dynamic where there's a lack of creativity within the FPS genre. There's a lack of edge. There's a lack of newness. There's kind of more focus on monetizing existing customers. There's more of a dynamic of trying to keep players engaged. And these are not necessarily bad things, but ultimately I think that when you're making a business, when you're making a video game, the ultimate goal should be to say, how can I bring value to the customer? How can I make this a fun and great experience for them? And it seems counterintuitive from a business perspective, but if you bring value to the customer, they will be loyal and they'll give you revenue. They'll buy your games. They'll continue to support you. And I think that in a lot of ways, there's been this inversion within video games, and in particular the FPS genre, where there's more of a focus on monetization and not bringing value, bringing the smallest amount of value possible to keep players engaged and continuing to buy the product. And I think that eventually this lack of creativity will erode the games over time. You kind of see this with a declining popularity in certain video games. And I think that that's really kind of something that is continuing to kind of put the FPS genre in perpetual decline. And like I said, it might even just be perpetual decline for a certain amount of gamers, a certain amount of people that are just fed up with the genre in general. They're fed up with the experience not providing something of value or fun. And there's also kind of this lack of immersion within it, where you have these crazy cosmetics, you have these purple or pink weapons or crazy outfits that take you out of the experience, especially like a Battlefield game where you want to be immersed in the time period. You want to be immersed in this experience, but there's so many things that throw you out of it, whether it's these kind of microtransactions, whether it's cosmetics, gameplay dynamics that bring you out of the experience. They aren't fun. They're manipulative. And I think that turns a lot of players away. And so there's been like kind of a lack of focus on immersion, and there's been more of a focus on monetization. There's more of a focus on selling that purple or pink cosmetic because people can basically buy them and then they get more revenue per customer. So in a lot of ways, I do think that's a huge problem. And there's a lack of innovation in general. I mean, so much of these video games have kind of stayed the same for the last 10 years. Where's the new gameplay mechanics? Where is the new AI? Where is the new dynamics? In a lot of ways, I think that there's not a reason for these studios to do that. It's just more of a focus on continuing to churn out game after game and keeping people engaged and monetized with microtransactions. And so that's an unfortunate thing that's kind of influencing the broader video game market in of itself, but that lack of innovation eventually makes the genre stale. And I think that that is going to affect things. And the last thing is that the whole market and the cultural element to the FPS genre is changing. And in a lot of ways, I think that what the FPS genre used to be or is at this moment will continue to change, and maybe not for the better. So there's this huge component with streamers. It's changed the dynamic with the FPS genre, in my opinion, where there's more of this focus on the hero, the 20 to 30 KD ratio versus working together as a team. And so I think that there's been a push towards that. There's so much more money in video games now. There's money in streaming. There's money from competitive esports. There's money in terms of being an influencer that have, in a way, contaminated the experience. You know, there was really no money to be made playing Battlefield 2, Battlefield Vietnam, or the old Call of Duty games back in the day. And so, you know, that money has changed the dynamic. It has pushed people's incentives in different directions. And there's also been kind of a dynamic to push towards video games that are a little bit more Twitch-based shooters versus kind of more longer, methodical, teamwork-based first-person shooters. Those games do exist, but I'm kind of talking about these really high AAA studio big games. Of course, there's always going to be these more niche, more specific FPS games, but I'm talking about the broader FPS genre in general. And I think that there's also been this broader push to a certain aesthetic from an artistic perspective that's, like I said, there to just push microtransactions rather than realism. Because if you have this kind of more goofy, more sci-fi, more weird aesthetic, there's a broader range of cosmetics that you can sell. A perfect example of this is Fortnite. Versus if you have kind of a hyper-realistic shooter, it's a little bit harder to sell those cosmetics. You have to kind of think about it creatively. And from a business perspective, that's more cost, that's more time, so forget that. And I think that, like I said, it hurts the integrity of some of these video games. And so ultimately though, these consumer dynamics, these changing market dynamics are here to probably stay. And I think that if you love the FPS genre or you like what it was, I just don't know if it's going to return to what it was. And there's so many headwinds that kind of make the FPS genre kind of in perpetual decline, at least if you value some of the things that I mentioned. And I think that in a lot of ways, the game series in general, or the FPS genre in general, is in risk. It's an existential risk because these competitive dynamics can completely destroy why people play these games in the first place. Unless you kind of believe in the mindset that there'll be a world where people just play bots, they play into algorithms that manipulate them, they try to extract as much money from them as possible, that there's a huge epidemic of cheating, that no one knows what's real or not anymore. And that could be the reality of the situation, that you kind of enter this very dark and kind of almost doomer perspective where nothing is real, there's huge amounts of cheating, and that's the reality of the FPS genre. In some ways, maybe that's already the case right now. But if it continues to decrease, there's also that chance that the consumer, the player, just doesn't accept it, and the FPS genre completely collapses or slowly and gradually enters a level of mediocrity and perpetual decline that it'll never recover from.